Civil rights disobedience, a comparison among blacks, women's, and gays. Interviews with students. What do you know about civil rights protests? I know that it was a big problem in the 60s, and I automatically think of white and black people. I know that there have been protests for blacks, women's, and gays throughout history fighting for equal rights. Where did you learn that from? School, TV, books, or a combination of all of them? Combination of all of them, some museums as well. We focus on civil rights for blacks and women a lot in school almost every year, but I learned a lot about gay rights protests mainly from current events. Mainly school. I feel like it was heavily focused on in history class. Do you know anything about the civil rights movements of people with disabilities? If I had to guess, I would think it was about when things started becoming more accessible with people with disabilities, and the gap between people without disabilities and the people with them started to become smaller. Not really. I know that now it is much easier for people with disabilities to get help or to get around. Areas have become much more accessible. Do you know anything about the students at Gallaudet in 1987? No, nothing. I've never heard of it. As we could tell from our interviews, we got a lot of the same answers. Students from the University of Illinois are well informed of civil rights protests of blacks, women's, and gays from school, museums, or current events. However, they know very little about any civil rights movements of people with disabilities. Our goal is to inform people the similarities and differences of the civil rights movements they are familiar with between blacks, gays, and women to the civil disobedience of the students at Gallaudet in 1987.
Has the prisoner anything to say why sentence shall not be pronounced?
Yes, Your Honor. I have many things to say. Your denial of my citizens' right to vote is the denial of my right of consent as one of the governed, the denial of my right of representation as one of the taxed, the denial of my right to a trial by a jury of my peers as an offender against law. Therefore, the denial of my sacred right to life, liberty, property.
The court cannot allow the prisoner to go on.
From the previous video, you can see how Susan B. Anthony explained in her trial that the protests, rallies, and other acts of civil disobedience will continue until women are given the first step to achieving equal rights. And on Election Day in 1920, American women exercised their right to vote for the first time.
In 1957, Dr. Frank Kameny and Jack Nichols co-founded the Mattachine Society of Washington, one of the first gay rights organizations in the United States. The Mattachine Society fought for equal treatment of gay employees in the federal government, the repeal of sodomy laws, and the removal of homosexuality as a mental disorder in the American Psychiatric Association's Manual of Mental Disorders. This protest of the White House is one of the most significant events in LGBT history as the first gay rights protest.
During the Civil War, slavery was abolished, but blacks were not protected from discrimination, leading to the civil rights movements. Many instances and protests took place in these years. Rosa Parks refuses to move from her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Blacks stage sit-ins in local venues. Many riots and protests take place going against the unjust laws these people are supposed to abide by, and Martin Luther King Jr. is arrested for his protest in Alabama. However, eventually, King leads his people in the famous I Have a Dream speech, and actions towards desegregation and equality are taken. It was a long process and a rocky road, but eventually, after many stifles, their actions were successful. If you continue to watch this video, you will be able to get a glimpse into their fights and triumphs during the civil rights movement. The 1988 protest by deaf students at Gallaudet University was a defining moment for the disability rights movement. The protest was the catalyst for the civil rights movement for persons with disabilities. This event then led to other movements for other persons with disabilities. Deaf President Now. Watch what Pres1 King Jordan says about how he felt about DPN and board trust members. Thursday, March 10th, 1988. So yesterday, because I have been a candidate and wanted to be both reasonable and fair, I gave a statement recognizing the legal authority of the board to name the president of Gallaudet University. In fact, my personal reaction to the board's decision was and is anger. Anger at the continuing lack of confidence the students, joined by the staff and faculty, have focused the world's attention on the larger issue. I must now publicly affirm my support for the point of view held by the Gallaudet community. The four demands are entirely justified.